the Watchers and the Forgotten Mission of Jesus Christ. And he drills down into Genesis 6 and shows how how Christ's ministry from his genealogies to his return, which hasn't happened yet, how what he did and what he said reversed the curse that came on the earth, or is in the process of reversing the curse that came on the earth because of Genesis 6. Also, we're going to be spending a little time next week and maybe the week after looking at the material out of the book of Enoch. And so I'm going to plug, you can get nice hard copy, or my original copy of the book of Enoch was just this paperback. And Mike Heiser also wrote a two-volume set that he calls a companion to the book of Enoch, a reader's commentary. And so the way these are written is, as you're reading the book of Enoch, and if he was sitting right next to you talking to you about what you're reading, that's what these are. They're not a technical commentary, they're just a reader's commentary. So I want to give you a heads up about those things. My daughter in South Carolina messaged us yesterday. So her daughter is in daycare preschool sort of thing. And they're going to the zoo for Halloween. And she said everybody's probably going to be dressed up in costumes. And so what she said she's thinking of doing is putting her in a yellow outfit and sticking googly eyes all over her so that she could go as the lion-like living creature out of Revelation 4. I got a kick out of that. I can't wait to see a picture. Okay. Genesis 5, we're going to hit Genesis 5 today. Last week we looked at the ungodly lineage of Adam through the line of Cain. And we saw the outworking of sin in Cain's life and the lives of his descendants. And we saw that the power of sin reached its pinnacle in the seventh generation, Lamech, who married 2 wives and killed a man for striking him. And then on top of that, he demanded a 77-fold vengeance against anyone who tried to kill him. Adam had to be persuaded to sin, but Cain just fell into it. God tried to reach Cain, but Cain felt rejected and in turn rejected God and his attempts to draw Cain back into a relationship. And so God marked Cain with a mark so that people would leave him alone because God wanted to limit the bloodshed. But Lamech only wants to take revenge and increase the bloodshed. So that was last week. This week we're going to look at a totally different story. The godly lineage of Adam through his son Seth, those of men and women who sought the Lord, who worshiped God. This particular account, bridges, it traces the lineage from Adam to Noah, and it bridges the stuff that's happened before to the stuff that's going to happen next, the flood account. We're going to see what we see in this chapter is a repetition or a recapitulation of a bunch of the different names that we saw in the previous chapter 4. And this suggests that there is redemption possible because of the faith and the faithfulness found in this family line. There is a phrase that's used in this passage, the mention of each of the patriarchs' other sons and daughters. And that's an indication that these guys were being faithful to God's original commandment to multiply and fill the earth. Unfortunately, though, because of what happened in Genesis 3, the patriarch comes to the end of his life, and he had, it says, other sons and daughters. His days were X number of years, and he died, except for Enoch. Enoch had other sons and daughters, and he was not found because God took him. One of the other things that I noticed about about Genesis 5 that connects it to Genesis 4 is that the last patriarch in the genealogy has 3 sons. They both have 3 sons. And I want to just remind you about, I use the abbreviation LXX, which is the abbreviation for the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The LXX is the number 70, and the word Septuagint means 70 because 70 Hebrew scholars were conscripted by the king of Egypt to create a copy of the book that they could read, of their holy book, that he could put in the library at Alexandria. It's different in some respects from the Masoretic text, that's the one that we find in our Old Testament, is usually translated from the Masoretic text. But it's based on Hebrew texts that are written 12 to 1300 years earlier than the oldest Masoretic text manuscripts. And we're going to find, or maybe some of you have discovered that in this chapter, the dating is different in the Septuagint from what we read in the Masoretic text. And so, let's jump in. Verses 1 and 2, I'll just read them. This is the record of the family line of Adam. When God created humankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female. When they were created, he blessed them and named them humankind. Verse 1, we have instead of having the normal sort of these are the generations of, we have a different phrase. It separates the different sections of Genesis from each other and creates a transition from the previous section to this next section. And so we're starting a new section. We're going to see that phrase again in chapter 6, chapter 10, and twice in chapter 11. In these 2 verses, the word Adam, is used in 2 different ways. It's used to refer to Adam, the man, his proper name, but it's also used to refer to all of humanity. And I had mentioned before that Adam is connected to the word for red, and also connected to the word for earth. I have the 3 Hebrew letters there in your notes. That's how Adam is spelled, Adam, and that's also how Edom is spelled. So it's an interesting kind of connection there. And then if you put the H, the hey on the end, which means to place. And if you remember, Eve made a play on Seth's name when she called him Shet because he replaced Shot, Abel, who was killed. Okay. and verses 6 through 8. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. Seth lived 807 years after he became the father of Enosh, and he had other sons and daughters. The entire lifetime of Seth was 912 years, and then he died. The Septuagint, verse 6, says Seth lived 205 years, not 105 years. And then he fathered Enosh. And I had talked about Enosh's name last week, that the father of Canaan. Enosh lived 815 years after he became the father of Canaan, and he had other sons and daughters. The entire lifetime of Enosh was 905 years, and then he died. The Septuagint says that Enosh lived 190 years when he fathered, and then he fathered Canaan. So Canaan is an interesting sort of name. The first three, it has the same three letters in Cain as in Cain's name, except there's an additional N on the end. And that creates what's called a diminutive form, which means you could translate Canaan as little Cain. And if you remember last week, I mentioned that Cain's name is a play on the word kana, to create. Eve had made the statement at Cain's birth, I have created a man just as the Lord did. Little Cain. So you have Adam and Enosh, man, and Canaan, little Cain. The man gave birth to little Cain. And Canaan lived 170, when Canaan had lived Mahalalel. Canaan lived 840 years, and after he became the father of Mahalalel, and he had other sons and daughters. The entire lifetime of Canaan was 910 years. Man, we're just blitzing through this chapter. Okay. When verses 15 through 17, when Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Yared, or Jared. Mahalalel lived 830 years after he became the father of Yared, and he had other sons and daughters. The entire lifetime of Mahalalel was 895 years, and then he died. The Septuagint says in verse 17 that Mahalalel lived 165 years, and he fathered Yared. The name Yared, or it's Yered in Hebrew, could come from a verb that means to descend or to come down. You have the name of the river, the famous river in Israel, Jordan, which means down from Dan, coming down from Dan. But it could also be related to the word, one of the words for rose, which is vered. The difference is that Irad has this initial guttural letter in front of the other three letters. I haven't been able to find an answer to that question yet. I've been digging and digging and digging, and I don't have an answer. And none of the resources I have even talk about it. Verses 18 through 20, when Yared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. Yared lived 800 years after he became the father of Enoch, and he had other sons and daughters. The entire lifetime of Yared was 962 years, and then he died. And the Septuagint says, and Yared lived 162 years, and he fathered Enoch. So it's the same. The two different manuscripts have the same number. Oh, I should mention this. We have in our Bible, we have a lot of names, Hebrew names. The J always sounds like a Y. And so when I'm reading these texts, I'll either say our modern J sound or I'll say a Y sound. So just as a point of the way my brain works, so you guys aren't confused. Wait, it doesn't say Yared, it says Jared. Well, plus looking at the Hebrew all the time, that yod, that letter yod, sounds like a Y, but it's very often, or in the past, it's been very often transliterated as a J. Okay. He fathered, so Yared lived 162 years and he fathered Enoch. After he, yeah. So the name Enoch, or Hanoch in Hebrew, has a root that can mean to initiate or to introduce. It could also be from a noun that means founder. I've actually looked into these names. I have a book at home that's a pretty technical study on these names, which gives a lot of information that I'm not gonna give you because it's all very technical. I have seen sometimes people create a sentence. The father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God for 300 years, and he had other sons and daughters. The entire lifetime of Enoch was 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and then he disappeared because God took him away. And the Septuagint, and Enoch lived 165 years. And verse 22, Enoch was very pleasing to God for 200 years after he fathered Methuselah, and he fathered sons and daughters, and all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch was very pleasing to God and was not found because God transposed him. So this is now the seventh generation from Adam in the line of godly men, godly patriarchs, and the pinnacle generation, the seventh generation, and the pinnacle of his faithfulness is that he skipped death. In fact, in the verse, Enoch is taken, he skips death, he's taken to heaven, and Lamech is a murderer, and Lamech is a bigamist. Total opposite of how one could live their lives. Would you put up the next slide? I think it's the next, or it's two slides. Go to the next ones. Oh, okay. So at that time that I was meditating on all this stuff, I had this idea that maybe if Enoch wanted to get back into Eden, he'd have to walk through that flaming sword. It's not a doctrine, not a hill I'm going to die on, but it was an idea that I had, and so I did this painting of Enoch getting ready to step into the flaming sword. Which was the common one in the ancient world. This hangs periodically. I'll sit there and do my stuff while I'm sitting there. And when a lot of times we've had people come over and put them in that space in front of the piano and have them listen to hear what God wants to say to them. When I put this in an exhibit at Mercy Hospital in Iowa City, in that hallway in front of that painting, it was there. So somehow it's in the spirit realm, it's tied to this painting. Just a little bit of the weirdness of my life. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Is the same as the previous slide. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived 780. This material in it basically says we don't know what it means, what kind of a root it is, or what verb or noun it might have come from.
Same spelling in Psalms as Sheila. No,
Yeah, the word in Psalms is Selah, which is different than this. Okay. Lamech, who is Methuselah's son, he lived 182 years in the Masoretic text, and he had a son. He named him Noah, saying, "This one will bring us comfort from our labor and from the painful toil of our hands because of the ground that the Lord had cursed." Verse 30, Lamech lived 595 years after he became the father of Noah, and he had other sons and daughters. The entire lifetime of Lamech was 777 years, and then he died. So the Septuagint says Lamech lived 188 years. And he lived 565 years after he fathered Noah. And then the days of Lamech, is you have the Septuagint pushing the date of creation further back than the Masoretic text. So Lamech names his son Noah, and again he makes a wordplay with his name. There's the Hebrew, the three letters that spell Noah's name, Noah in Hebrew, and it's related to the verb nuach, which means to rest. And so Lamech made a wordplay with Noah's name. And he prophesied that Noah would be the one to bring them comfort. The word for comfort is nacham. In context of the verse, it's Yinachamenu, comfort from the hard labor and toil because of the curse in the ground. Verse 32, and after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In the Septuagint, it's actually chapter 6, verse 1. Noah lived 500 years, and Noah fathered three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And there's a footnote. Time to work itself into creation, but now this day it has had thousands of years to work itself deeper and deeper and deeper into creation, corrupting everything that it touches. There's this viewpoint that I've run into with scientists, paleontologists, geologists. It's called uniformitarianism. A uniformitarian is the word, and basically it's a belief that the way things are happening today is the way things have always gone throughout history. I learned about that when I was studying history. Came across it in different science classes. I've taken a few science classes over the years. The way things are today is the way they've always been. You know, I'm going to get myself into trouble here, but the Grand Canyon, you know, they say, well, it's the Colorado River has worn out the Grand Canyon over however many tens of. So Sumer was an empire in southern part of the Fertile Crescent. And this king list has a list of 8 kings who ruled before the flood. And it gives the years that they ruled. And they ruled for a period totaling 214,000 years. So it turns out, though, that the Sumerian and Babylonian calculations are made from a mathematical system that's base 60 instead of our system is base 10. And if you translate those calculations to a base 10 system, you end up with these 8 kings having lifespans that are comparable to 5. Yeah.
What I believe, what I've read in the Bible, at the beginning was going to be eternal. And it's sinned and things started falling.
I always wondered where did they get it took 120 years to build the ark. I'd read that passage over and over and over again, and I'd never see that, because I always assumed that the 120 years is a human being's lifespan, not the time that they had to build the ark. So let me just give you just a tiny little bit of history. So Sumer, the kingdom of Sumer, the Hebrew name for Sumer is Shinar, which you've encountered probably in reading Genesis 11. Shinar. Sumer, the oldest writings that we have are Sumerian. They date back to 3400 BC. But the only way that they've been able to sort of decode or translate the Sumerian writings has been because the Akkadian, so Sumer, Akkadian, that's Babylon, Babylonian, not the one, Babylon 1, is north of where Sumer is, and they have these word lists. It's basically like a lexicon or a dictionary. So they'll have the Sumerian word, and then they'll have the Akkadian equivalent of that word, and that's the only way that they've been able to figure out how has the generations parallel. And I asterisked Lamech's name and Enoch's name. The 7th generation is the pinnacle of the choices of those in their respective generations. Okay. Wow. Can't believe I'm done. Any questions?
For those of us who can't see well, can you explain that chart up there
Oh, yeah.
better? My eyes just aren't picking
Yeah,
up
it's-
the numbers and the.
It's pretty small. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So the first column obviously is the name. The Septuagint is on the left and the Masoretic text is on the right. So the name of the patriarch, the patriarch's son, the age, the third column is the age at which the patriarch begot his son. The son's age, The sun's birth age from creation numbers is 4004 BC. Then the next column is the lifespan of the patriarch. And then they did the last column then is a math equation that gives you the dates from creation to that patriarch's death. It's a little hard to, yeah. It's pretty small. Anyway, I found this really interesting when I came across this material. The young Earth, a lot of the creation scientists will go with the 4000 BC as a date of creation, not having looked at the Septuagint. And anyway, I think the Earth is older than that.
There were two floods, weren't there?
Hmm?
Weren't there two floods? One before Adam, and then one.
Well, there is only the suggestion in Genesis 1 of the earth being formless and void, that being the watery chaos. There is not a suggestion heavenly beings that rebelled at the same time. There is no scripture verses that.
Wasn't Satan's fall really up in heaven? His pride got you taken.
You can't derive that from the text. That may be so. I will say that may be so.
Because Jesus had to
But-
go back to heaven, apply the blood on the mercy seat.
Garth, you need to repeat what he's saying since he's
Oh, okay.
no one knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, so the question was, what about the watery chaos at the beginning? Was there a flood that caused that watery chaos to exist in Genesis 1? And I don't think that there's a scripture verse that points to that. There are a lot of people that are talking about a war in heaven before Genesis 1:1 or before Genesis 1:2, but the grammar, the Hebrew of Genesis 1, 2, and 3, you cannot derive that idea from that text. The Hebrew grammar absolutely forbids the idea of a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Not saying it couldn't have happened on the text, and trying to avoid speculating. Speaking of speculation, there was an interesting interview that I heard this past week. There's a guy named Ali of planets, going way back pre-Genesis 1:1. That may be so. I'm not going to say it can't be, but the text, the biblical text, doesn't support the idea. So that's one of those things where I'm willing to say, I don't know, and I'm not going to necessarily form an opinion about it, and I'm willing to just let that gap stay there in my brain. As much as I want all the answers, I'm going to just let that gap sit there. I'm sure there will be a day that I will find out. We will all find out exactly how it all played out. And
Find out we were all wrong.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So you brought up the issue of the flood. And that's a couple of questions kind of headed back towards that. I know that there's a school of thought out there that perhaps the flood was regional
Yes.
and not global.
Not universal, not global.
Hit that, and then I'll ask another question.
Okay. The idea of the flood being regional is based on the idea that the view of the people in this part of the world, that was all the world, a global flood. But I know that there's a lot of evangelical scholars who think it was a regional flood. And you can get either view or both views out of the text that we have.
Okay, going back to the flood, all right? The reason why I believe it was universal, all right, was because of what the watchers that came down. And that polluted the DNA of everything that was here, except for Noah, his 3 kids, their wives, and his wife.
Yeah,
And everything else God wiped out.
yeah, right.
That's why it was sorry that he made man and went to 120 years.
Yeah, right. That's been my position for forever
Yeah. I mean,
also.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So with that being the case, then, because I think biblically it expresses that it was global.
Mm-hmm.
But with that being the case, and you brought up the whole Grand Canyon issue, that would have meant that the entire globe had to have a presence of humanity. I mean, so even,
Yeah.
I mean, just think of the natural aftermath, of a catastrophe like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So God not only purified the earth, the inherent sin issue was not removed from the earth. It was only reduced,
Right.
which is why we got back to where we are now.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, take that element out and just look at just the natural issue of the environment. God had to completely reestablish the whole ecological system, completely around the earth. And how many years? Think of what Noah inherited.
Yeah.
He lived in a war zone.
Yeah.
Just devastation everywhere.
Everywhere.
And we don't think in those terms, but how long, unless God would have just supernaturally recreated, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about that?
I have thought about it.
And then let me follow up with one
No,
more
go
thought.
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
If you remember Mount St. Helens, so in the Chicago area, it was a cold, wet summer. We didn't have the ash fall that they had further west, but things started growing as soon as that whole thing, dating tests that scientists have used, whether they're geological or biological, which that's carbon-14.
Did you have a second question? You want?
I can always.
Well, it
I
fits
have
in.
my own mic, so I can.
It fits in because you said, how old do you think the Earth is? That's my first question, and then I wanted to go to Mount St. Helens too. But how old do you think the Earth is?
I'm not sure. My sort of range, I have a range. I'm thinking it's like between 10 and 15,000 years old.
Were volcanoes on the Earth before the flood, or were they created afterwards?
That's an interesting question. I never thought of that. I don't know. It's possible that they were on the earth before the flood, or at least there was. So a volcano is formed when magma comes out of the earth and rises up to the surface. But if you have the description in Genesis 6 is the great fountains of the deep broke open. And so we could have had a lot of volcanic. That's how I would answer that.
And then some people say the purpose of a volcano is to enlarge the depths of hell.
I haven't
That's
heard
how-
that before. That's interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
So
new
that
one.
thought's out there too. So if that, as opposed to politics, hallelujah.
Yeah.
So just think of then. Just think of then. just think then of the mess that Noah inherited, not just in terms of like uprooted trees. I mean, the whole entire globe, and I mean the ravage that it did, to the land geographically,
Yeah.
and even think of the mud. I mean, he got out and So I don't know. I would almost suggest that in the redemptive hand and nature of God, because God had to reset and restore, the ecological systems of the earth. I mean, because think of the animals, and because obviously animals aren't, they don't sin, they don't have a
Right.
sin nature, but there was something.
Their DNA was badly corrupted.
It was corrupted.
Yeah, yeah.
So even in that, I mean, imagine, how beastly the beasts were because of the level of corruption on the earth, that God had to wipe out all the animals as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a few.
Where you have, so when I first started this.
Just throw me a bone.
Okay.
We'll gnaw on it later.
When I talked about the Divine Council, and I talked about Psalm 82, and the rebellion of the members of the Divine Council, and God says, you guys are done. You're gonna die like men. And God divorced those members of the Divine Council in Psalm 82, which in my mind occurred at Genesis 11. And mankind in Genesis 11 had, rather than spreading out and filling the whole earth, they all gathered into one spot. And so and they didn't want God, they wanted whatever God they had imagined, and they were building an artificial holy mountain to replace the one that had been in Eden. And so God divorced both the